gonna go ahead and start recording, and then I will let everyone in, perhaps.
Thank you.
Okay, there we go. Hello, everyone. We're just gonna let everyone trickle in for a second, and then we'll go ahead and we'll get started. Just as a heads up, if you're joining us, this is a recorded session, but this is also a Zoom webinar, so no need to worry about the sounds of enjoying your lunch. They will not be captured, promise. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and we'll get started. I'm going to kick this off. I'll just do a brief introduction, and then I will turn it over to Dr. Youngs. So thank you all so much for being with us today. Let's go. Come on. Oop, there we are. I'm Janie Adams. I'm the History Engagement Coordinator for the Arizona Historical Society. I'm also a staff historian and the Associate Editor of the Journal of Arizona History. I'm really excited to have you all here with us today. A little bit about AHS. The Arizona Historical Society is a nonprofit educational and cultural institution and a state agency, and we were established in 1864. We collect, preserve, and tell the story of Arizona's past through museum exhibitions, libraries and archives, collections, outreach, educational programs, and through publications. AHS preserves our past, shares our state stories, and connects people through the power of Arizona's history. And if you'd like to stay connected with us with what we do at the Arizona Historical Society, there are lots of different ways to stay connected. Consider becoming a member of AHS. Members get copies, print copies of the Journal of Arizona History straight to their mailboxes, which is such a treat. You can sign up for our email list. You can follow us on social media. You can explore one of our museums. And you can learn about all of that and more by visiting us at azhs.org today. A couple helpful reminders for this session. So this is a Zoom webinar. Dr. Youngs and I, we can't hear you or we can't see you. And if you need to communicate a question with us, you can do so using the Q&A feature. This program will be recorded, and that recording will be available on our YouTube channel in a couple of weeks. Expect maybe a little bit of a delay because of the holidays, but I will email all registrants with the recorded program, and we're going to put it up on our social media and make sure that everyone knows that it's available. So if you've enjoyed this program, consider becoming a member of the Arizona Historical Society, azhs.org/membership. All right, without further ado, I would like to introduce our speaker, Yolonda Youngs. Dr. Youngs is a professor of geography and environmental studies at California State University, San Bernardino. Her expertise is in national parks and international protected areas, environmental justice, conservation of natural resources, environmental policy, management, tourism, outdoor recreation, and geographic information systems, also known as GIS. Dr. Youngs has written or co-authored 30 journal articles, books, book chapters, and book reviews. And her work is featured in a bunch of different places throughout the national park system. Her books include Framing Nature, which we're going to learn about today, and The American Environment Revisited, Environmental Historical Geographies of the United States. She has received many awards, including an Apple Distinguished Educator Award, Outstanding University Researcher Award from Idaho State University, and a Scholar in Residence Award at the University of New Mexico. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Youngs.
Well, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, and thank you all so very much for attending this program. I'm delighted to have you today, and I very much appreciate you taking time out of your schedules to join us. So to begin, just want to emphasize again, let's see, I'll get my picture over here maybe. My name is Yolonda Youngs. I'm a professor in the Department of Geography and Environmental Studies. I'm here in California, California State University, San Bernardino in Southern California. And this year I'm also on the American Association of Geographers Protected Areas Specialty Group Chair. So that gives me a different perspective on sort of national and international issues that involve national parks and international protected areas. And again, I want to say just a huge thank you to Arizona Historical Society for hosting this and for this wonderful invitation. Again, to all of you for attending the talk. So for today, I want to talk about some of the parts of my recently published book, Framing Nature. It came out in June 2024 from the University of Nebraska Press. It's available on Amazon and at the University of Nebraska Press's website, both as an ebook and print book. And I have to say, of course, I authored the thing, and I encourage you to pick it up. But the press really did an incredible job with this book. As a scholar, I haven't seen many presses really do a wonderful job with the print quality, the color. You could see the beautiful cover they did. But they also sort of embrace the colors of the canyon, which, as you see, and what you're going to hear very soon, is very important to our understanding of the canyon, or at least that's my argument. And they actually change the font colors throughout the book, and they have very crisp reproductions of my maps and some of the images that you're going to see. So I hope you'll consider picking it up. It's great for Grand Canyon fans, and I know many of you probably have a very deep history of Arizona and the Grand Canyon, but hopefully this will reveal some new insights for you as well. It's very richly illustrated, as you can see here, with photographs, illustrations, historical maps, as well as some brand new maps that are original maps that I created, and a very deep appendix, which I'll mention just briefly in here for those of you interested in a little bit more details.
Yolanda,
So,
before we move on,
yeah.
a couple comments have come in about audio. Do you think maybe you could adjust your microphone a little bit?
Yeah, so give me a second here. All right, is that better? Can you hear me better? I'll keep saying some things until I get some feedback.
Let's just roll with it, and then
Okay.
we'll.
All right. Well, please let me know as we move forward here, and I'll just double check that connection. All right. So overall, the points I want to make with this broadly about the Grand Canyon is that as we think about the Grand Canyon, the book pulls on history, of course, and we'll talk about that here in a moment. But I also have a very clear eye to the future of the Grand Canyon and the present that we are living in. And if we want to think about an environmentally sustainable and resilient future for the Grand Canyon, it really relies, I think, on a larger regional context. So not just thinking the national park is certainly a key element and a centerpiece of thinking about the Grand Canyon, but I also encourage you to think more broadly about what I call the Greater Grand Canyon region. And you've probably heard some definitions that pull on that regional context, but I think that helps us to think about a more resilient Grand Canyon as we move forward in terms of its environmental and social resiliency. Also, thinking about the Grand Canyon and how we see the Grand Canyon is very important, not just in terms of those experiences of visiting it, perhaps either in person or armchair travel, but the images that we see about the Grand Canyon very much affect our environmental perception and our decision making. And the Grand Canyon is a multicultural place, and it has been a multicultural place for a very long time. So not only is it home to the 11 associated tribes that trace their history back to time immemorial in the park, but it has a complex Spanish, Mexican, and Anglo heritage as well that we'll see in some of the imagery and some of the themes I talk about. So just briefly, I've got a very nice introduction here, but just to tell you a little bit about the background and why I might have written this book. I am an environmental and cultural geographer. I'm very broadly trained in cultural, physical, and geospatial geography. So we have a very big discipline, which means, in other words, that I'm a social scientist, I'm an environmental scientist who works in the field, and I also have this technology side of my work. I have a number of long-term environmental monitoring sites. The Grand Canyon's one of them. And part of that data goes into this book, but I also have active projects in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, in Yellowstone Grand Teton National Parks. I'm here now in California. I recently moved about 4 years ago, and I have sites in Channel Islands National Park. And I also work in UNESCO sites internationally, and particularly my current one is in Venice, Italy. So just to give you a little sense of that background, also, I love Arizona. For all of you that are tuning in that might be living there or your heart is in Arizona, I got my PhD at Arizona State University in the School of Geographical Sciences and Planning. And I got my master's degree from Montana State and my undergraduates from Florida State. So this is a map that often is in the front and center of my mind. And of course, it's the United States, but we're also looking at national park system units. And I say units because it includes national parks, but also the many other designations and units that the National Park Service manages here in our country, including battlefields, seashores, and monuments. Right now, we're at 432 units across the United States, and my specialty is mostly in the West, but my work has encompassed many sites throughout the United States. Of course, today's talk, we're thinking about the Grand Canyon, and you'll see a number of postcards like this. I draw on a lot of imagery of postcards and photographs, but the Grand Canyon looms rather large, I think, in our geographic imaginations. And it has a tremendous influence on not only Arizona, but nationally on environmental policy and how national parks and protected areas are managed, understood, and visited and used. Of course, it's a very popular park. It's usually in one of those top 10 lists of national parks in terms of visitation. It was at a height of visitation right before COVID, and you could see some of the statistics here in 2019, almost 6 million visitors. Of the most recent count, it's rebounding after, of course, a lot of people went there right after COVID as well, but 2023, the most recent statistics, it's getting a little closer to 5 million once again. And in the appendix of my book, if you're someone who's really interested in these kind of details, or I should say, any of the more specific information and quantitative analysis that I draw on for some of the conclusions you're going to hear in today's talk, you can look into the appendix of my book, which I tucked away a lot of this good information. But from this, I just want to emphasize it's such a very popular park, and it's a park that it seems like many people know, and it's an icon of nature in the United States. So why did I write this book? Well, a couple different reasons. One, I love national parks and I love the Grand Canyon. And I was working originally, the start of this book occurred when I lived in Arizona. But I was very interested to understand how multiple and sometimes conflicting ideas and meanings of nature are contested and they're negotiated and they're translated into natural and cultural resource management, public land and water policies, as well as visitor use and outdoor recreation in these protected areas. And I wanted to use the medium of landscape, which is a geographer that's some of our classic methods, are to really look at that broad view, that landscape you see in the background here, and see how the landscape might shape all of these ideas. So in terms of areas you might be interested in that the book touches on, certainly this is a great book for those of you, or if you have friends or family who are interested in national parks. Also, if you're interested in what scholars call visual culture and media, lots of that in there as well. I pull on that literature. This is also a book that pulls on tourism geographies as well as environmental sciences and that human environment geography approach. But when we think about the Grand Canyon, I ask you to actually, the whole screen is blank, and this is on purpose right now, and I ask you to think about the Grand Canyon. If you've gone there, perhaps an image comes into your mind of where you were when you first saw it, or a distinct moment in visiting it. If you haven't been there, I suspect you've seen a picture of it. You've certainly seen a few already today in my talk. But think about what you see in front of you. If you will, paint a picture in your mind. And as I talk to people about the Grand Canyon, when I was originally starting this work about 15 years ago, people would think about the rim, perhaps a dramatic perch as you see here with these people. But oftentimes that view that we think about is a view from the rim, looking across that vast landscape, seeing the blue sky in the background, maybe some clouds as you see on this day. But there's a really distinct horizon line with that rim side location, and then looking down into this incredible deep canyon below us, and starting to realize sort of the scale, how big we feel or how small we might feel, and the incredible beauty. There's a lot of emotions as well as sort of intellectual things that are going on here. And as I talked to people about the Grand Canyon when I started the work, I was really intrigued by how many people just wanted to see it. And in fact, Northern Arizona University did a study many years ago, but it's an interesting study where they actually asked visitors to identify which part of the park, the Grand Canyon National Park, the facilities that they used, and to rank them according to their importance and quality. And it was very intriguing to me that overwhelmingly, Canyon Overlook scored the highest for use, importance, and quality, right? People were asked to report on the highlight of their visits, and more often than not, they said the canyon itself, right? So from this, I thought, well, this is amazing. Of all the national parks out there, 430 plus now, at least, this is a park where people come to do a lot of things, right? Maybe hike, maybe drive around, maybe take a float trip, maybe have a cultural experience. But a lot of people come to the canyon just to see the place. And so to me, that triggered my research to look more at visual ways of understanding this canyon. And when we think about the Grand Canyon, a lot of big ideas come to us. It's beautiful, it's awe-inspiring, it's wild, it's dangerous maybe. If you're thinking about doing like a big hike there, it gets really hot in the summer, really cold as well. We might think about it as adventure or maybe the geology. But in any case, the Grand Canyon has certainly become an icon, not only nationally, but internationally. And so today I want to talk about how we might frame nature at the Grand Canyon and what I mean by that. Right? So some questions that guided this work were, how do popular visual representations shape our environmental perceptions of the canyon? And I'll tell you what I mean by that here in a moment, what popular visual representations are. Maybe what are the implications of these images and our perceptions for park environmental management and policies? And how does this influence the tourism experience? Right? And then finally, do these representations shape our understanding of contemporary cultural heritage and social political context of the greater Grand Canyon region, sort of reaching to that multicultural Grand Canyon with that one? Right? I briefly want to talk about, because this is an Arizona audience specifically, many of you might know the Grand Canyon, some of you just perhaps it's on your bucket list to visit. But behind the scenes, if you will, of the book and what I'm talking about today is 15 years of research. I've already mentioned I'm a field scholar as well as one that's based in social science, and there's archival research here. But over those years, I've hiked up and down the canyon many times on a variety of trails. I've floated the canyon for 3 weeks in the Colorado River. I've driven almost all of the major roads on the north and south rim. I've completed a lot of archival research, not only on the site at the Grand Canyon National Park, but regional archives, national archives as well. And my fieldwork included a lot of applied research, landscape observation, lots of conversations with park managers, visitors, and researchers. And so I wanted to highlight some of that and just give you a brief view of some of the work that was involved in that, because this is behind the scenes, like I said, of the book. It's not something that I included all these pictures, but this gives you a sense of the importance that I found in going to the park and really getting to know it. So not just going to the archive, but actually seeking out almost all the pictures I'm showing you, especially the postcards I'll show you in a moment. I've gone to those actual locations to retake the images. As I said, I've experienced it in a variety of ways, hiking up and down, floating on the canyon. and also taking a tremendous amount of pictures and talking to a lot of people as I moved along. So just to give you a few visuals there to go with what's behind some of the imagery and some of the things that I do in this book. Here, I'm also presenting one of the key methods that I use in terms of my field work and to inform my work, especially this visual work, is I did repeat photography. So I oftentimes use a historic image, such as this historic postcard, and then I try to go to the exact same spot and take the photo today. There's a lot of those then and now books, but there's also a very specific and clear scientific process behind that. And the imagery sets that I have inform my work, but they also are part of my long-term environmental monitoring. I also want to make a pitch here for why I put so much emphasis on thinking about the Grand Canyon in a regional approach. The park is, as I said, a key part of the landscape, but I think it's also very important for us as we move forward, experiencing, managing, understanding the Grand Canyon, that we think about it as not just the national park, but we think about that broader mosaic that includes a variety of federal public lands. Park Service is one of them, but also Forest Service, also a variety of Native American nations and tribal lands, state parks and public lands, and of course there's city, county parks and areas as well. So when we think about the Grand Canyon, of course, we can think about its dramatic topography, as you might see here. We can understand it as a very large park unit, 1.2 million acres. Of course, the centerpiece is the Colorado River. That's 278 miles just in the national park there, obviously much longer beside of that. Depth of the canyon, about a mile. Of course, it varies depending on what part of the canyon you're in. And then a really key element too is the difference in elevation. The south rim is at about 7,000 feet, and the north rim is a little bit higher, 8,000 feet. And that makes for slightly different ecosystems and environmental conditions. And we see that reflected in the imagery. And of course, that shapes environmental management of these areas and ways that they are used and experienced. In terms of putting that social layer on the Grand Canyon, this is a map perhaps that's familiar to many of you. Again, emphasizing a variety of public and private lands and tribal lands that make up this broader region. We have, of course, in dark green here, Grand Canyon National Park, but also the Kaibab National Forest to the north and south, other public land units such as Grand Canyon Parashant National Monument. We have the distinctions of Lake Powell and Lake Mead in terms of their recreational resources. They're also protected areas to a certain extent. And as I mentioned, the tribes as well that have a very long history of calling this canyon home and being stewards of this landscape. This is a book from, or this is a map from my book. This is basically how I defined the greater Grand Canyon region. There are several other ideas about what the extent of it would be. As a geographer, I put quite a bit of thought into north, south, east, west points of that. But you'll notice that my greater Grand Canyon region stretches over into, and you can just barely see it, over into New Mexico, all the way over to Las Vegas, up into Utah, and down just a little bit south of Flagstaff. And as you read the book, if you hopefully will pick it up, you'll see that I very distinctly include each of these locations because this is what I found in the landscape, and this is what I found in the archive and the historical resources that I looked at in terms of what was the Grand Canyon. I also put a lot of thought into the vertical elements of the Grand Canyon. So this is not just a rim or river approach. I think about the river landscape, the Colorado River, of course, the stretches of trails. I call them mid-canyon areas. Of course, the rim, and then I had some aerial images as well that I considered. And those of you with a keen eye or who really know the Grand Canyon well will know this location just near Phantom Ranch, and you can maybe make out a raft trip right here that's just about to float through. So the first part of the book dives into the view from the rim, actually, which in terms of thinking about popular imagery, that is imagery that was created. It could be a sketch, it could be a map, it could be a photograph, but imagery that was created and then distributed broadly to the public, meaning in newspapers or magazines or somehow serialized and very inexpensive, if not free to access. So I didn't look at any sources that were private collections or difficult for the public to see. But if you're interested in sort of Powell's surveys and those early Spanish and Mexican heritage marks on this landscape, you might want to look at that early chapter. I'll make some references to it, but for this talk, I actually want to just provide two little vignettes. Of course, it's a large book. I can't talk about everything, but I'll talk about editing nature and then what I call Canyon Be Damned. So we'll start off with editing nature and thinking about what I call the social construction of scenic beauty, or how do we socially construct what we think is beautiful about the Grand Canyon. So when you go to the Grand Canyon, and again, if you've been there, you've had this experience, and perhaps you have ideas about where is the best sunset point, right? And these are two images I took. Again, I've done an extensive amount of field work in a variety of different ways in the canyon. And I always was intrigued around the evening as the sun was getting ready to set. People would pack up their food, finish their dinner, and quickly scurry off to whatever they thought was going to be the best sunset viewpoint. So even here at the lodge, they're suggesting Yavapai Point is perhaps the best view for a sunrise, and Hopi is the best view for a sunset. And you know, these kind of images of people enjoying these incredible play of color and light, and you could see the variety of colors in the canyon, from oranges and reds to purples and pinks. It is a tremendous experience, but it always kind of amazed me, because as someone who's known the canyon from the rim and really known it from the river, there's so many beautiful spots to view the sunset. I was always intrigued by why there was certain places people wanted to go. And I started to look again at the imagery. So I want sort of behind the scenes, if you will, as to how images, popular images of the canyon, were created. And for this part of editing nature, or thinking about editing nature, I looked at three different postcard publication companies. One of them was the Detroit Publishing Company, and everything that they produced of the Grand Canyon from 1900 to 1909. Fraser Photo Cards, everything they produced of the Grand Canyon from 1929 1937. And then Kirk Tyke, which really was internationally one of the biggest postcard producers of any kind of place, from 1936 to 1955. And those are those postcards that you might think of as a classic postcards. They have that kind of textured linen feel, really dramatic colors. You'll see quite a few of those. So I did, again, a lot of the book is based on postcard imagery and historic photographs, as well as historic maps. So I looked at three different manufacturers. I thought that was interesting to see what different companies were doing, if you will, with the same place. And they're very different styles as well in terms of production. And what I found was intriguing about the postcard production process is that postcards were basically an early form of what we might know as Photoshop. So the process would be that the companies, and those companies that I mentioned, there's other ones as well, but those were kind of the biggest companies. They would hire photographers, and those photographers, they would say, all right, we're going to assign you to a location, say it's the Grand Canyon. We're going to give you a list of locations. We want you to take pictures and then send back those images to us here to our factory. And they really did have postcard factories. And then we're going to create postcards from them, right? So the photographer would go out in the field and take pictures such as this. Obviously, these top ones are not the Grand Canyon, but to give you a sense of things, you know, postcard photographer would go out in the field and take the images, and then they would send those back to the company that was making, or the factory that was making these postcards. And they would often include annotations, and perhaps you could see little scribbles here. And in this, they would say, you know, take out building, make this blue, make this red, more green, right? And so they could do a process whereby here's a famous William Henry Jackson image, where here is his basic original image, and then with that editing process and colorization process, it became this postcard from Detroit Publishing Company. So it was very important what colors were selected. Subjects such as people, buildings, plants, animals, anything could be added, removed, altered. And in that process of revision and editing, then they also produced new images every year to have new products, basically. It's also important to keep in mind that this was mass media, right? So postcards in the height of their time, which, like I said, 1900, 1955 is about what we're looking at here. They were not only sold in stores such as this one for the Detroit publishing cards, but of course people purchased them when they came to the park and used them to record their ideas and send them back home. Of course, some people also just collected these postcards just to have these images. Right? The production process, so that gives you a little sense about creating the canyon in terms of the production process behind the scenes. In my research, I also went to archives specifically for each of these postcard manufacturers to see what their specific process was and the notes that they had, right? And overall, I've found that as I looked at these images, like I said, I looked at over 400 postcard images and then many more photographs. We'll get to those in a moment. I found that there was something that geographers Wyckoff and Dilsaver called spatial bias, meaning that some places in the canyon were represented more than others. There was a bias towards certain places. And I found that overall, the places were on the rim, and specifically the south rim. So that left that mid-canyon area and the river historically really underrepresented. And I think we have some real implications about how the canyon was managed and used because of that. And I'll get to those points here in a moment. So as I looked at each postcard, I did what's called a visual content analysis. I looked at what was actually shown in that image. And I grouped not only the places that were shown by if they were vertical or horizontal locations, but I also looked at certain themes that I would see over and over again, you know, of people, buildings, of water in some way, and made a note of that. So I have, again, in the appendix, if you're interested in that kind of stuff, you can see the detailed quantitative analysis. So again, I looked at 410 postcards for this section of the book and 3 different manufacturers, roughly from 1909 to 1955. I also want to say that I looked at hundreds of images from the wonderful publication Arizona Highways, which began in 1925 as an engineer's journal with some nice black and white images of culverts. And then over the next few years, they decided to shift more towards tourism and featured many, many pictures of the Grand Canyon. I've looked at every picture of the Grand Canyon in Arizona Highways from its beginning in 1925 well up into the 1980s and beyond, right? So this also, what I'm about to talk about, comes from over 1,000 images from Arizona Highways, mostly photographs, and like I said, from basically 1920s to 2009. So the different approaches that postcard manufacturers took to editing nature, as I call it, varied. One method, so this is Kirk Tyke's method, was called color embellishment. They actually moved to copyright this. So you can see maybe in this very nice scan, the postcard, maybe the texture, it's called a linen postcard. But here you can see perhaps the thing that pops out for this image of the Bright Angel Lodge is the green vegetation in the foreground, as well as these brilliant junipers. And in this process, the company, Kirk Tyke, would actually, you know, take that original image and they would add and they would apply color. And each year that they would reproduce that image, they would take notation of what was done and then perhaps change it for the next year's publishing. So, for example, I found this documentation, which is very detailed, of exactly what was done for every image. And if you can imagine these factories back in Chicago or Detroit, that included sometimes hundreds of artists with tiny paintbrushes and exact work would perhaps change the color or add or remove subjects, as I've mentioned before, and that would all be documented here. And you can also see quotes like too much green and yellow, there should be more red shown. So there was really distinct colors that were chosen for the Grand Canyon as well. And I also want to remind you, as a geographer and a social scientist, part of my world is that when we think about the canyon's landscapes, they are social and cultural landscapes. And I pull on a variety of geographers and other social scientists and historians and anthropologists for this book. But here from the authors Cosgrove and Daniels, they remind us that a landscape is a cultural image, a pictorial way of representing, structuring, and symbolizing surroundings. So in other words, that landscape is it's not that it's immaterial. They can be included in a variety of materials, such as the tower that we're seeing here, Desert View with the stone, and we can see the vegetation on the ground, but it's also a landscape. It's embedded with meanings that we might infuse into it. It's embedded with our experiences and uses. And it's this kind of heavy weight, if you will, that these postcards and photographs really pulled upon for some of their broader meanings, right? So if we think about social and cultural landscapes at the canyon, for example, this postcard of El Tovar Hotel, which was a very popular postcard for Kirk Tyke, they produced this many, many times over the years, each time slightly changing what they included in the image. And so I thought it was interesting to look at who was controlling and shaping the cultural landscape during this early postcard era. So that would be, the actual landscapes of the Grand Canyon, who was shaping what kind of roads would be there, what kind of buildings, what was going on in terms of that social, political, and economic context. So just to remind you, in parallel with these postcards being produced, there was a lot of activity at the Grand Canyon. And perhaps you've heard this from other scholars who've spoken in this series. Grand Canyon was a national monument in 1908. It was primarily managed by the U.S. Forest Service at that time. In terms of settlement and population, there were Anglo settlers and entrepreneurs, and of course, ever-present Native American residents in terms of what was going on with that canyon scene. And then in 1919, there was a huge shift for the Grand Canyon, of course, as it became a national park and moved under the purview of the U.S. National Park Service. And also we had that shift from those small businesses and the Anglo settlers and entrepreneurs to these larger corporations and powerful influences of the Santa Fe Railroad and the Fred Harvey Company that really produced a lot of those physical landscapes. The places that we go into, like El Tovar Hotel and Hopi House, those were created in this early park era, and very much with the connection between the railroad, the hospitality company of Fred Harvey, and the U.S. Park Service. So when we think about, well, what can park iconography, what can these images of the park tell us about the changes in the protection, management, and quality of the natural resources, such as the geology, the air quality, and importantly, of course, the biodiversity, right? Well, if we look at just the colors of the canyon, perhaps at first when I talked about the colors, you thought, well, yes, the canyon's beautiful and has a lot of colors, but so what? Well, I found that over time, looking at these images, it didn't really matter what colors the postcard companies selected for the canyon imagery. And overall, it was reds, orange, and maybe green for vegetation, right? So here you see a series of these repeat photographs. Again, that's where I took the original postcard, found the same location, and then retook that image. And here you can see the images and their times. So here's a postcard from 1905, another postcard from 1909, and then my contemporary retake there in 2008. So it's the exact same scene of El Tovar Hotel. You can see perhaps the water tower here, and then we're missing these images. But notice how red the canyon is here, still a real emphasis on red. And then, in the contemporary image, maybe a little bit more of that beige color. Again, you might be saying, so what about color? But that influences not only what we see of the canyon, but if you never were to go to the canyon and all you were to see is this image of the Grand Canyon, you would expect that to be a very red and orange place. And if you want to visit it and it didn't have those colors, you might be disappointed. And that might affect what you care about the Grand, or how you care about the Grand Canyon, and what decisions you make about its protection and use. I think we can also make some arguments, or at least some ideas that we can pull away about the air quality of the Grand Canyon. I don't go into this in a great depth in the book, but I do touch on a little bit in terms of thinking about, of course, today's environmental Grand Canyon and climate change, and our ever increasing wildfires. Certainly, there are days you can't see across the canyon. I've over my years of doing research there, I've heard many a tourist complain when they can't see the depths of the canyon. But sometimes that happens from maybe just haze or wildfire smoke, but also it can come from polluting sources as well. Looking back at that historical imagery again, we could see that a clear sky was the choice by all the postcard manufacturers. Again, here we're just looking at Kirktyke, but this is what I found for the other ones as well, is that they would take that historical image. So this is the original image. And then in the production process of making the postcard, they would literally just blank it out, and then they would, the postcard artists would paint this blue and then add clouds later in. And in the postcard archive collections, I saw that they had they asked for a retouched sky, right? So if we've seen a bulk of images of the Grand Canyon where that sky is always blue, those clouds are always puffy, I asked sort of, how does this affect our ideas about the air quality at the Grand Canyon? Do we expect it to always be crystal clear? Or how do we manage, and what decisions do we make about the value of having clear skies and good air quality in the park and the greater Grand Canyon region? The Park Service, of course, has taken a variety of approaches to this, as well as with other federal and state agencies, of thinking about haze in our national parks. And you can see some of the interpretation, of course, at the Park Service itself about thinking about air quality and these views and climate change. I want to shift just a little bit here and think about another aspect of nature, and that's wildlife. One of the most striking things about looking at these many images that I looked at for this book is the lack of wildlife. So perhaps you've seen the National Park Service has these wonderful sort of cheeky social media messages now about encouraging visitors who are encountering so much wildlife that they should keep their distance for their safety and the wildlife safety. But what I found in the postcard imagery was quite different, right? But just to emphasize, the Grand Canyon, in terms of the experience of the Grand Canyon, and part of its meaning and value is its incredible biodiversity, right? 91 species of mammals, and you can see here a variety of other types of species as well. It has a higher mammalian species diversity than Yellowstone National Park, which may be surprising to some. So it's incredible biodiversity here, right? You can see all of these creatures at the park in a typical visit, depending on what part of the park you're going to. But yet, when I looked at the postcard imagery, I found this incredible lack of biodiversity. And I don't think it's because these creatures, this wildlife, was not there at the time. Overwhelmingly, what I found was that in the postcard imagery and even in the photographs, it was the call of the domestic, as I say. The primary creatures that I saw, wildlife, were horses and mules, and occasionally maybe a dog that might belong to one of the wranglers. But I did not see any birds. I didn't see any reptiles. There were no predators, absolutely nothing, right? Except for deer, horses, and occasionally quite a bit mules, right? So this was a very typical image of a mule, and this is a later image where they've taken, the postcard manufacturer's taken a Grand Canyon image and imposed another postcard onto it that included a mule, so two icons of the canyon. And again, sort of a retouched photo, as they like to say, blending these two elements together. As I said, the only sort of wild animal that I saw in all of these images were mule deer. right? And so you can see them here in the Fraser postcard. These are what are called real photo postcards, as well as this Kirktyke postcard of these seemingly domesticated mule deer at the canyon. So what sort of environmental and wildlife management policies influence the subjects in the postcard imagery? So here I'm trying to connect, why was I seeing this, to me in my modern eyes, a dramatic lack of imagery of wildlife when how did those images connect up with the policies of the time? And so just briefly, I want to mention that, this postcard era, especially when we're thinking about the 1930s to the 1970s, so the 1970s goes a little bit beyond that sort of golden era postcards, but if we think 1930s to 1970s, in terms of wildlife management in the United States, predator-prey dynamics were very important. So in 1915, the U.S. Department of Agriculture funded wildlife control policies to specifically hunt and kill a number of predators, coyotes, wolves, that are often, visitors and residents at the Grand Canyon. In 1929, George Melendez Wright led the first wildlife and biological survey of American national parks. That's 1929. That's really one of those high eras for postcard manufacturing and image making that I'm talking about, at least here. And then 1931, U.S. Division of Predator and Rodent Control created a number of policies as well to eradicate predators in the landscapes across the United States. So when we don't see predators in our images, any sort of coyotes or mountain lions, but we do see a lot of mule deer, I wonder what connections might be happening there in terms of these policies, right? In terms of the incredible number of mules, also that was part of that biodiversity claim. Of course, mules came to the canyon as part of that early mining and tourism, and eventually those burros were released, and the Park Service was faced with trying to eradicate some of the wild burros from the Grand Canyon, and that became a very controversial topic, especially publicly, and perhaps some of you remember this, as there was sort of this burro eradication. In 1971, the Wild and Free Roaming Horses and Burro Act actually started to protect these creatures. But here again, you can see some Arizona Highways images featuring those very popular mule rides. Okay, and then just briefly here at the end, I just want to wrap up with thinking about water resources. The early Grand Canyon, the view of the canyon was not so much from the rim, but very much from the river. So here you're seeing the paths of Powell's expedition and the Cole brothers and others, and really lovely, I think, and dramatic imagery such as this from Thomas Moran, who accompanied Powell, of showing us the depths of the Grand Canyon. So those Colorado River expeditions featured, of course, the river, and these were the popular images that appeared in Scribner's Monthly and other publications that the public at the time would have known the canyon from the river up instead of the rim down. And we see that echoed even in 1954 in Arizona Highways images that focus on that area. So Detroit Publishing Company, again, the postcards really changed the colors of the canyon each time they published these each year. But overwhelmingly, the Colorado River was represented in this sort of turquoise blue color. And we see that as well in the Kirktyke, the Kirktyke publication and postcards of a very bright blue turquoise river. But in fact, when those publications and those postcards were coming out, the river would have looked more like this, a warm, silt-laden, free-flowing river. Those postcards were created, almost all of them, before any sort of dam was produced in the Grand Canyon. So something to think about there in terms of those popular images. And just briefly, you can see sort of that construction timeline of our major dams and water reallocation in the Grand Canyon, again, came after many of these postcards were produced. right? So thinking about images like this from Arizona highways to ask us, where is the Grand Canyon and where is the Colorado River? Well, visitors today, of course, there's only a few locations along the rim that you can really clearly see it. But it is certainly the centerpiece and a major part of what is protected in Grand Canyon National Park. And I really found the river to be best represented in Arizona highways, particularly those contemporary or later images that featured, as you can see here, the numbers in circles showing the number of images that I found in the locations, but quite a few showing these early reservoirs that were appearing from Lake Mead and Lake Powell, and recreation along these areas, everything from motorboats to sailboats, and then really sort of glorifying the creation of dams as well. And this figured in prominently with water wars that were, of course, raging across the Colorado River in the American West. As the park was enlarged in 1975 to include Marble Canyon, some of this involved clashes over water use and protection and blocking the dams that were proposed for the inner canyon. And instead, we see Arizona highways not only showing the dam production, but equally in their pages, showing the explosion after World War II of outdoor recreation, backpacking, camping, and whitewater rafting images such as this, right? So when, just to end up here, where is the real Grand Canyon? Towards the end of the book, I feature this particular image. This is from Arizona Republic, a 2008 article, which I found really striking and maybe a little humorous. Which Grand Canyon is the real Grand Canyon? And I took this to be more of a discussion of trying to search for authenticity when we ask about a real place. Any parts of the Grand Canyon, just like any sunset is spectacular at the Grand Canyon, any part of the canyon is real canyon. But here they were really trying to set up between the north and south rims, which are in the National Park Service boundary, and at that time, and now it's expanded quite a bit, the tourism services and developments on the west rim that are in Hualapai tribal lands. So in Arizona highways, they sort of asserted the power of the Grand Canyon and that view from the rim with statements like this is the Grand Canyon, but emphasizing the view of the Grand Canyon from the south rim inside the Park Service boundaries. And perhaps now we're thinking more broadly about other places to experience the Grand Canyon, such as the Hualapai tribes, tourist development, and their skywalk. And here I show you a little excerpt from the Park Service, making sure to try to show people that it's a 5-hour drive between the Park Service sites and other sites along the west side of the canyon. And then within this, I also want to encourage people to think about the Colorado River, not only the value and incredible importance of that water to us economically, and thinking about the value of water in the arid West, but also thinking about the experiences of wilderness and adventure, and perhaps what the canyon means to us in terms of those inner canyon experiences. And drawing on one of the more recent postcards, thinking of multiple Grand Canyons, this sort of pastiche showing us different iconic places in the Grand Canyon. So again, I end with thinking that the Grand Canyon includes a national park, but it really needs to consider a much more broad definition if we're to think about the future of the Grand Canyon in terms of a stable and resilient future for the Grand Canyon that needs to really think about that regional context. I think thinking about the ways that we see the Grand Canyon, especially those popular images, are very important. And we need to consider the Grand Canyon as a multicultural place as well. So that's the end of the talk. Thank you all so much. Again, a big thank you to Arizona Historical Society for hosting this talk. And thank you all for attending. And I also just want to thank the University of Nebraska Press, the Charles Redd Center for Western Studies, and of course, my university and other areas that have supported this through research. So thank you so much.
Dr. Youngs, thank you so much for your time today. This was fabulous.
Thank you.
I'm really as a historian, as someone who loves history, I think a vintage postcard is something that's right up my alley.
Oh, good.
And thinking about what images are being presented, consumed, if you will, is so important. And I had never considered, in my even in my relatively small collection of Grand Canyon postcards, wow, the animal representation, the representation of flora, like all of these different things are so important for whatever kind of narrative these publishers are kind of putting forward about this place. So that is I think, a really wonderful thing to consider. So a question that I have for you
Okay.
is what did you find most surprising while you were conducting this research?
Oh boy, there's a lot. I mentioned the wildlife part because that really blew me away. I had a joke with one of my colleagues and friends that I double dog dared them to find a squirrel in a postcard or a picture. Because when you go to the Grand Canyon, you see lizards, squirrels, ravens, all kind, and nothing in the imagery. And at first, I thought, it could be just the photographer what they did. But then once I realized, and it was quite surprising, the depth of editing and the, as I call it, editing nature. But each of these manufacturers had a patented process for how they would add or remove, just like Photoshop, right? And they also did it with people, which I think that's another talk, but that has some really serious implications when you start to take out people who are represented as being in the canyon, particularly the tribes, which were very prevalent and have always been. So that was very surprising, as well as someone who's known the canyon mostly from the river, the dominance of the rim locations, and finding that really it was only about 5 or 6 locations, South Rim Village, Grand Canyon Village, that I saw over and over and over again. There's no fern grottos. There were some trail sites, but there's just such an incredible multiplicity of the canyon's environment that wasn't represented. And I think that speaks to a broader public understanding about what do we need to protect the Grand Canyon. If you only know there's a few spots and you only think about for the rim, why would you care about the water, or why would you care about the wildlife down the riparian area? So,
Right, absolutely. That
yeah.
that ties into your final point about, there's the park borders, but of course that is, in a way it's artificial, in a way it's deeply meaningful. And understanding the impact of that boundary, whether or not it's just kind of imagined boundary or a fence or what have you, is really important for thinking about the future of our resources. So I really appreciate that. Um, I think that is all of the questions that we have. So thank you so much for joining us today. Like I said, I'm hopeful to have this presentation up real soon. But please forgive me if holiday brain kind of makes it difficult for me to do that. But thank you so much for being with us today, and I hope that everyone has a great rest of their Thursday.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. It's been a
Bye, y'all.
pleasure.
Take care.
Bye.
All right.